You're listening to ArchaeoEd, a podcast about the ancient civilizations of the Americas. I'm your host, Ed Barnhart. I've been an archaeologist, an explorer, and a seeker of esoteric knowledge all over the Americas for 30 years and counting. This podcast is just me, no guests to help me fill the airtime. Sometimes I'll teach you about the many civilizations of the Americas long before Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Other times, I'll tell stories of my adventures in the field. It's just me, freed from the podium and talking like we're just having a beer together. If that sounds good to you, then sit back, relax, and let me tell you a tale. Season 6, Episode 2, How I Mapped Palenque, Part 5. Okay, this episode covers May and June of the 1999 season of the Palenque Mapping Project. When we last left our heroes, they were mapping out my favorite part of Palenque, Moisés' Retreat. Now Jim and I started exploring the Arroyo Piedras Bolas. The Piedras Bolas is unique among Palenque's 5 rivers in that the rocks in its shallow bed are all round like balls, hence the name Piedras Bolas, which means ball rocks. The rocks are round because they've been rolling down the riverbed, picking up limestone particulate floating in the river after big storms. It glues onto the surface of an original object, rolling along and picking up more as it goes like a snowball. The formation is called a concretion. They're found in rivers all over the world. The ones in the Piedras Bolas are small, from golf ball to softball size, but some concretions are huge. The biggest in the world get to about 6 foot in diameter, and those end up on unsolved mystery shows. The most famous are the giant spheres of Costa Rica. Those are made of a volcanic stone called gabbro and said not to be concretions. I think they're concretions with a mix of gabbro and limestone in their layers, but that's for another podcast episode. The bolas stones of the Piedras Bolas only occur on the section of the river that crosses the flat part of Palenque's plateau. It's the gentle slope of the river there that allows the balls to form. The neat thing is those concretions can form around anything. Once we found a cracked one with an ancient potsherd inside, and in another river we found one that cracked open to be the head of a figurine. So those first couple days in May, Jim and I followed the Piedras Bolas downstream. It fell off the plateau's edge into 2 small waterfalls and then continued out to the plains and the cattle pastures below. A part of the river was diverted underground, passing underneath the courtyard of Moisés' Retreat, and then it popped out as another waterfall just beneath it. That was clearly hydraulic engineering designed to give Moisés' Retreat its own waterfall feature. Fancy. The area to the north and below of Moisés' Retreat and east of the Piedras Bolas was big and relatively flat, but there were almost no buildings there. Strange because Palenque is very densely settled, and this was a prime location for another neighborhood. We called it the Milpa then, but later I proposed it was an inner-city tree grove. A big storm blew in just as work ended that day. The power went out in El Panchan, so we went to Don Mucho's to get a beer and wait out the storm. A loud crack noise came from the parking lot. We ran out there to find a huge tree had fallen on my yellow station wagon and a VW bus parked next to me. It cracked my windshield and bent the upper frame a bit, but it still drove fine. The owner of the VW bus was losing her mind about it. She yelled at Chato that she would sue him, and he just laughed at her. She had a bumper sticker that read, "Trees are the answer." We all laughed at the irony of that. Kirk French and his father Buster showed up in his white Montero full of house supplies that weekend. Kirk had left the moment his semester was over and planned to stay the entire summer. David Stewart and Merle Green Robertson also showed up, so there was a big party at Moises' house that night. About midnight, Chato's crew chief Marcelo ran in crying and in a panic. He said his daughter had been bitten by a nawiaka. Kirk jumped into action and drove them to the clinic in town. We were all relieved to hear that the snake had dry bitten her, no venom. She was shaken up, but okay. That Monday, we drove Kirk's dad Buster to the airport in Villahermosa and picked up children's book author Peter Lorre. Peter wrote adventure travel books for kids. He had called me months earlier and wanted to do a book on the Palenque mapping project. I said, sure, show up and we'll bring you out to the field with us. He did write that book. It's called The Mystery of the Maya, Uncovering the Lost City of Palenque. I'll put an Amazon link to it in my show notes. Peter showed up on what would be our most complicated week of mapping to date, maybe the entire project. There was a single modern footpath from the ruins parking lot to the west where we were mapping. Local people from the village of San Lopez Mateo used it to walk to the site. We walked it daily the other way, and it became a temporary boundary marker for our mapping efforts. Moises' retreat is just north of that trail. Now we crossed it and started mapping uphill to the south. What we discover is that it was a series of 10 interconnected terrace levels, each full of buildings and climbing 60 meters from the bottom to the top. In offset levels, its terraces stretched all the way between the Motiapa and the Piedras Bolas rivers, 100 meters on average. It was huge and very complicated. The challenge was that all those buildings were built into the hillsides. We could only see 3 sides of a building. The 4th, south sides, were embedded into the mountain and covered with erosion. Luckily for us, many of the walls were still intact and exposed, making it easier to guess at the buried parts. Peter took notes in a tiny notebook as we struggled uphill, finding terrace after terrace. And these weren't little terraces. Some were 3 meters tall and stretched for dozens of meters. At this point, we were a half a kilometer away from the public architecture of the city center. This was a neighborhood, but its terraces were monumental. More than any other part of the site, this area proved that Palenque had public work projects to create terraces and open areas for city residents. Those terraces were way beyond what an extended family unit could make for themselves. Merle and Linda had named it the Chenille Pa Group, but never mapped it. Now I knew why. It was a real brain teaser. We had a bad snake encounter that week. One of the terraces was covered in a tangle of low-hanging vines. We were cutting a tunnel through it, long enough for 5 of us to all be in cutting at once. Then suddenly, a huge snake was wriggling in the vines above our heads. Manuel was mid-body and hacked into the belly. I was closest to the head, and it screamed out in pain. Fer-de-lances do not scream. I looked closer and realized that it was a boa, a 12-foot-long boa. I immediately called out to stop, but Manuel's hack had already cut almost all the way through its body. It quickly slithered off, but I doubt it survived. I really regret that episode, and I'm sorry that I now know what few do, that boa can scream. Peter Lorre slept in Kirk's room, and Kirk told us the craziest lie about him just for fun. He said that he slept naked, above the covers, sweaty, with nothing but a pink crocheted hat covering his head. We all bought it, and it was hard to look at him in the eye for the rest of his stay. Kirk later told us that it was a lie, and we all had a good laugh about it. But I never told Peter about that. If Peter's listening to this podcast, It'll be the first time he learns about it. Sorry, Peter. Kirk was then and remains a bit of a trickster. Okay, first commercial break here, and then more about the chenille pas terraces. Your dogs aren't just pets, they're family. So treat them like it. I mean, literally treat them with Pawistive Cravings. My family's pets are so spoiled. We're always on the lookout for a new treat that they would like. My wife actually makes our dog and cat what she calls a bark-tutory board every morning for breakfast. Pawistive Cravings offers the best single-ingredient meat-based treats on the market at prices that don't break the bank. They have odor-free bully sticks, collagen sticks, long-lasting cheeky sticks, cow hooves, pig ears, and much more. Go to PausitiveCravings.com for more information and use the code MAYA, M-A-Y-A, to get 10% off your order today. Tell them ArchaeoEd sent you. "2025 is on the horizon, so it's time for my annual Mayan wall calendar. This year marks 17 years I've been producing this calendar. Back in 2007, I inherited it from a nice guy named Jeff Schunard. He had been producing it for 20 years. He said, "I've done my cartoon, and it's time to hand the baton." I can't believe I'm approaching the completion of my own cartoon making this calendar. Anyhow, the 2025 Maya calendar looks great. As always, it features the winning photos from our annual photo contest. It's a regular wall calendar, but includes the Maya date for every day in 2025, plus important dates in ancient Maya history. It's available at my website, mayan-calendar.com. If you support ArchaeoEd through Patreon at the Mayanist level, you get one for free. Proceeds go to support Maya Exploration Center. Get yours today and see time in a different way for 2025. Hey, I'm back. I'm sure those commercials were compelling. We continued to map our way up the chenille pas terraces. On one, we found another deep tomb chamber with a slab inside. As we went up, the rivers on either side of the group closed in to less than 100 meters. At this point, both riverbeds were lined with walls, and we could see places where drains exited from their bases. Following those drains back, we found them crisscrossing the terraces and underneath buildings. They were using gravity, crossing from one river and downhill back to the other for the gray water. The entire neighborhood had plumbing and running water to the houses. Rogelio arrived late one day and asked to borrow 600 pesos. His mother was sick and needed medicine. He said that she and 3 other women in the village had been made ill by a bad witch. I gave him the money and didn't see him again for another 2 days. I should take a moment for a shout out to Colleen Connor. She was one of the many friends from Texas who visited my project, but Colleen decided to stay and help for 2 months. She was healthy, smart, and worked for free, just the kind of crew member I was looking for. She took over the survey data book as we continued up the terraces. I was on the rod for the whole month. Determining corners where the points had to be shot in was really difficult, so that responsibility and the calls for where those corners were fell to me. We finally reached the top of the terraces, and at the same level, both of the riverbeds became dry. There was so much water flowing below, we were sure that major springs were there somewhere, but we couldn't really locate them. We were able to make a map loop up there again, and it was 13 centimeters of error. We were still doing great on accuracy. On June 1st, the machine officially crossed the Piedras Bolas, and we continued the next big group to the west. Very near the modern trail, we found a small creek spilling into the Piedras Bolas. We followed it back into the woods, where soon it was lined on both sides with ancient walls. To our surprise, we tracked it to a place where it went under a 3-meter tall building. Climbing up and over, there was a large, wall-lined pool on the other side. It was 10 meters on a side and 2 meters deep. The creek didn't continue beyond, so there must have been a spring at the base of that pool. The buildings here were all residential, so our conclusion was that this was some sort of backyard pool of some rich Palenque noble. Palenque must have been a posh place in its heyday, like a Maya Beverly Hills. We knew the famous Templo Olvidado was in this part of the forest. Ruse excavated it in the 1950s. A quick reconnaissance showed it was about 200 meters from the Piedras Bolas. In between it and the river were dozens of buildings under low, thick vegetation. There were also old barbed wire fences running through the whole area. Between the low vegetation and the fences, it was clear that the area had recently been a cattle pasture. In 1987, Palenque became a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and a zone of protection was established around it. And soon after, a national park was established, wider boundaries around that. But until then, Palenque's periphery was privately owned parcels of land where locals were farming and cattle ranching. The new park forced them to vacate, though much of that land remained privately owned. We arrived a decade later to find thick underbrush that had grown up in those cleared areas. The locals called that kind of brush acawal, and it was considered a scourge, strangling the natural forest. Acawal was always full of rats and lizards, which made it also a big buffet for snakes. I decided we should cut the entire area, about 200 by 200 meters, or the size of 4 football fields. We needed more macheteros for that, so I asked Manuel and Rogelio each to find one more guy for us to work with. Manuel showed up with his cousin Jacobo. Good guy, strong worker. Rogelio showed up late again. He was supposed to bring his brother Pedro, but he was alone. I asked what happened, and he said his brother was shot. When I showed concern, he said it was okay that he was only shot in a limb. When I asked which limb, he replied, all 4. I just stared at him for a while and then just said okay. That was really what cemented my belief that Rogelio was a compulsive liar, and not a good one. I might have believed one limb. Why did he have to say all 4? On June 5th, Heather Hurst arrived to join our team. She had made some incredible reconstruction drawings at Copan and Piedras Negras. Now, by good fortune, she wanted to apply her skills to Palenque. She went on to win the MacArthur Genius Award, a $1 million award to do whatever she wanted with. The drawings she made of Palenque were part of why she won that award. But in June of 1999, she was just another dirt-covered member of my crew. Now I had Jim, Kirk, Colleen, Heather, myself, and 4 macheteros. The 4th machetero was Manuel's uncle, Elias. I decided to break us up into 3 teams. Heather and Colleen started making measured drawings of Moisés' retreat. Jim, Kirk, and I used the machine to map the freshly cleared areas of what we were now calling the Piedras Bolas group. The machete crew continued clear-cutting uphill inside the cattle pasture area. We were cooking with gas now. The clear-cutting opened wide areas, and we shot over 200 points in a single day for the first time ever. On another single day, we drew in over 30 buildings. Moy's birthday party happened on June 7th. It was a debaucherous affair, and we all woke up hungover. I was a jerk about it and made everybody go to work anyway. Heather was ready to start making measured drawings of the inside of Moises' retreat, so I sent our fearless spelunker Jim with her for the day. They came back that evening excitedly showing us their photos from the intact interior. There were windows, sealed doorways, and multiple hallways with thick plaster still on the walls. That same day, Kirk and I were mapping our way towards the Olvidado. I was standing on a hillside with Manuel, looking at my graph paper drawings and telling him where to cut next, when I looked down to see a 2-meter fer-de-lance crawling between my feet. I froze and whispered, "Nawiaka." We both stared wide-eyed and unmoving as it finished slithering between my boots. Then it stopped, turned around, and lifted its head about a foot off the ground and looked back at us. I made eye contact with it for at least 5 seconds. I still see its golden eyes in my dreams. But then he laid back down and continued to crawl away. It could have killed either of us, but it let us go. I wish I could say the same, but as soon as it was a few more meters away, I gave Manuel the go to kill it, which he did. Nawiakas are deadly, and I couldn't afford to be a Dr. Doolittle out there. We took the body home and Kirk skinned it. Inside was a rat that he had just eaten. Thank goodness for sated snakes. Okay, final commercial break here. When I return, we'll talk about the Olvidado and La Picota. My family has a fluffy little dog named Mr. Darcy. Truth be told, he's a bit of a nervous Nelly. We're always looking for new ways to soothe his anxiety. And recently our beloved old dog Dasher passed away. It was so hard to watch his joint pain increase. We tried everything to help him, but eventually it got to be too much. But in today's world, we now have CBD-based supplements to help our pets through tough times. Evergreen Natural Pet is a great choice for those supplements. All of their products are third-party tested. They have dog biscuits and extracts with little droppers so you can just drip a few drops onto their supper. They won't even know it's there. Perfect for picky little dogs like Mr. Darcy. All of their products are made with a special blend of supplements to support your pet's best life. They have Canna Chill for calming support, Canna Mobility for joint support, Canna Omega-3 with salmon oil for skin and coat support, and Canna Immunity with a blend of medicinal mushrooms to support your pet's immune system. Is your family pet a horse? Evergreen Natural Pet also offers Canna Equine for horses. Go to evergreennaturalpet.com for more information and use the code MAYA, M-A-Y-A, to get 10% off your order today. Tell them ArchaeoEd sent you. Hey folks, I hope that most of you know that, apart from ArchaeoEd, I'm also the director of Maya Exploration Center. For 20 years now, we've been conducting archaeological research, delivering public lectures, and leading educational travel programs. For 2025, new archaeologists have joined our team, and they'll be leading brand new educational travel tours. We're headed to Mesoamerica, Peru, Greece, Wales, and even Cambodia. Our trips are all led by scholars and include evening lectures. All levels of knowledge are welcome. Our goal is to educate in fun ways and exciting settings. To learn more and consider joining one of our adventures, go to mayaexploration.org. That's M-A-Y-A exploration.org. With 4 macheteros, we were killing it. In just 2 weeks, we had mapped the entire Piedras Bolas group. It was 79 structures, and an accuracy loop we completed was only 3 centimeters of error. We also found another tomb marked on Blom's map from the 1920s. Kirk climbed down in that one with a meter tape and confirmed that it was 3 meters underneath the terrace we accessed it from. Our next target area was the Olvidado and La Picota. We were excited to be there because it too had been recorded by Blom. He identified it as a secondary area of major public architecture. It was also the western edge of his map. No subsequent mapping project had ever been beyond it. Completing the western side of Palenque was our Season 2 goal, so we were almost there. The Olvidado, which means lost in Spanish, was a literal standout in western Palenque. It stood out from the hundreds of other buildings out there in that it was mostly intact. It was built of the same caliber construction as the temples in the ceremonial center, and just as large. Its superstructure, top temple, had its roof and standing walls, and the frontal columns had stucco figures like the Temple of the Inscriptions. Blom found it in the 1920s, and Alberto Ruz excavated it in the 1950s, but then it just became a destination for adventurous tourists. Many a hippie snuck out there and spent the night inside. Directly below the Olvidado Temple was the La Picota Plaza. It was a big open area with a major aqueduct and Palenque's only standing stela, called La Picota for its pointy top. We started at the Olvidado with our drawings. It merited a measured drawing, and that took a long time. Directly behind it and way above the Olvidado was a hill with a flat top. Its base extended all the way back to the Piedras Bolas River. We had climbed it once from that direction, but when we climbed it from the Olvidado side, we realized how big and strange it was. From the Olvidado, its flat top was 65 meters higher. That was a struggle with the laser theodolite equipment. Once on top, it was an area about the size of a football field, but not one single building. Instead, there were a couple of big holes with chunks of natural bedrock piled up on their sides. Our best guess was that it was an ancient quarry. It was exactly the kind of plateau that held big pyramids closer to the city center, so it was surprising and honestly a little disappointing that we found nothing but these holes. I sent Manuel and Elias up to go search it again, but not one single building. I don't think we put it on the map, but we called it Cloud Hill because every time we climbed up there, it was covered in a thick fog. Finally, we were ready to start drawing La Picota. A tourist trail led down to the mouth of its aqueduct. The jungle was extra thick there, like a curtain on either side of the trail. The aqueduct was incredible. Its exit was intact and tall enough for us to just walk inside, standing straight up. In about 10 meters, its roof got shorter. Kirk crawled into that part and popped out of a collapsed section in La Picota's plaza about 30 meters away from us. It was as finely built as the aqueduct flanking Palenque's palace back in the center. We searched and searched for the standing stela, but we couldn't find it. Exasperated, I pulled out Blom's map and leaned against a tree. But the tree was strangely cold. I touched it and realized that it was made of stone. The moss on its surface and branches that were hanging way down had just hidden it from us. We chopped it out and then took some fun team photos in front of it. I'll put a few of those photos in my show notes for you to see. The last week of June was the Palenque Roundtable, an important annual conference that was started by Merle and Linda in the 1970s. Merle would be there like she always had been, but this was the first conference after the death of Linda Sheely. Everyone would be there to honor Linda's memory. It was a big deal. I was giving a paper at the round table about residential burial customs and their effect on settlement patterns. Given that I was a 20-year-old kid about to present my ideas to a room of over 100 renowned scholars, I was a bit nervous about it. For most of the week before, I stayed home and sent Kirk and Jim out into the field. Heather stayed home too. Our goals were to work on our papers, and then for me to make an updated, polished map, and for Heather to make her first reconstruction drawing of Moises' retreat. We would make a bunch of copies and hand them out at the conference to the important attendees. Heather was my age, so this was a big opportunity for her too. We completed our goals early, and I went back out to check on the project. The guys had found a staircase with 9 steps that went from the Pacote Plaza along the aqueduct to a group of big temples. They had never before been recorded, but they looked like the temples in the city center, and they were just west of the Olvidado. They for sure have royal tombs in them, but to this day, they remain unexcavated. But there was a problem. The macheteros had clear-cut the entire area. It looked amazing, but they had cut too much. The whole group and its temples were fully exposed. Over in the Piedras Bolas group, it had been cattle pasture, and cutting that was okay. But the Pacota's underbrush was more natural, and the National Forest had told us not to cut that. I was gone all week, so I couldn't stop it. The Palenque Roundtable was a big success for us. People loved our maps and Heather's drawings. My residential burials paper got mixed reviews. It was controversial. Using documented modern Maya residential burial practices, I suggested that we were overestimating the populations of ancient Maya cities. The ancient Maya buried people under their houses. Over time, those houses were abandoned but not forgotten. They became important ancestor worship shrines for their families. The Maya returned to them, leaving offerings in contemporary ceramics. That meant that ceramic evidence could mislead us that a structure continued as a residential place when in fact it was a gravesite. That pattern, continued over generations, would produce a community that had more structures dedicated to the dead than the living. And counting all those grave sites as family houses would give us an exaggerated population estimate. The archaeologists in the crowd were offended. The anthropologists loved it. If by chance you'd like to read that paper, it's on my Maya Exploration Center website under Research. As the conference wrapped up, we went back out to work in La Picota. I had a copy of the map for a local man I had met on the trail the week before. When he walked by again, I gave it to him and explained it a bit. He started to walk away, but then he turned around and said, "Do you want to see the biggest building in Palenque? It's over 100 meters tall." I was a little incredulous of that, but I told the guys to keep mapping and followed the man. He said his name was Jose. I learned later that he worked for a landowner who did not want me there. Less than 30 meters west of La Picota River, there it was. Jose wasn't kidding. It was the biggest building in Palenque. A quick pace around its base gave me 80 by 70 meters on a side, and it was about 10 meters tall and very flat on the top. It was bigger and taller than Palenque's palace. To Jose's credit, the north side of the structure dropped off the plateau in terraces to the plains below. When we mapped it with the machine a month later, that was 80 meters tall on that side. So his estimate of 100 meters really wasn't that off. Blom's map stopped 50 meters before finding Palenque's largest building. To my thrill, we were the first to record it. And like the truth behind most archaeological discoveries, a local man casually led me there. We showed up the next day fired up and ready to work. But at 10 a.m., 8 men from the National Forest Department showed up. The round table had a parade of people coming in and out to see our work, and word got back about our overcutting. The leader of the men loudly announced that we were in violation and the mapping project was canceled. We were ordered to leave the forest and report to INA. How did I get out of that one? You'll have to listen to part 6 to find out. Until then, this is Ed signing off. You've been listening to ArchaeoEd, a podcast about the ancient civilizations of the Americas. If you like what you heard, please click like, subscribe, and tell your friends. If you didn't, don't do any of that stuff. ArchaeoEd is written, recorded, and produced by me, Ed Barnhart, and it's owned by my company, Ancient Explorations, LLC. ArchaeoEd is my intellectual property, all rights reserved. Copyright 2024.